I want you to stop what you are doing right now and think about the dense, tangled mess of vegetation growing along your property line. You know the one I am talking about. That chaotic wall of brambles and wild shrubs that you have been planning to clear out for years, the patch that catches your clothes when you walk past it, that blocks your view, that makes your neighbors shake their heads in disapproval. You have probably already priced out the chainsaw rental or gotten quotes from landscaping companies to tear it all down and replace it with a nice, tidy fence. But before you make that catastrophic mistake, I need to tell you something that might completely change how you see your land. That impenetrable thicket is not a problem to be solved. It is the most valuable defensive and productive asset on your entire property, and you are about to destroy it out of ignorance. Most people look at dense brush and see nothing but an eyesore, a harbinger of neglect, a sign that someone has let their property go wild. But when I look at that same tangle of vegetation, I see something entirely different. I see a biological fortress that has taken years to establish itself, a living barrier that cannot be kicked down, cut through quickly, or easily bypassed. I see a perimeter security system that requires zero electricity, no maintenance, and no monthly monitoring fees. I see a food production system that yields hundreds of pounds of calories every single year without you lifting a finger. And most importantly, I see something that modern society has completely forgotten how to value, a defensive layer that has protected human settlements for thousands of years, long before we had the luxury of thinking that a flimsy wooden fence was adequate protection. The problem is that we have been conditioned by decades of suburban landscaping culture to see cleared, manicured edges as desirable and anything wild as problematic. We have been taught that good property management means visibility, openness, and control. We mow right up to the property line. We trim everything into submission. We create these sterile green deserts that look pretty, but offer absolutely nothing in terms of real security or productivity. And in doing so, we have voluntarily dismantled one of the most effective defensive strategies ever developed by human beings. Our ancestors understood something we have forgotten, that an impenetrable living barrier is worth more than any fence you could ever build. And when that barrier also produces thousands of calories of food every year, you have created something truly irreplaceable. So here is what I am proposing instead of clearing that brush. We are going to intentionally design and plant edible thickets using species that have been proven over centuries to create impassable barriers while simultaneously producing massive amounts of high-calorie food. We are going to replace the useless scrub with carefully selected plants like honey locust, sea buckthorn, hawthorn, gumi, hardy orange, and edible roses. We are going to create living walls that are so dense and so viciously thorned that no human being in their right mind would even attempt to push through them. And while these barriers are protecting your property from intruders, trespassers, and unwanted access, they are also going to be feeding your family with nuts, berries, fruits, and oils that require virtually no input from you once they are established. Let me start with honey locust, because this tree is probably the single most underutilized security and food plant in North America, and most people have no idea what they are missing. Honey locust is native to the central United States, and it produces these absolutely wicked thorns that can grow up to 8 inches long. I am not talking about little rose prickles that scratch you. I am talking about genuine weapons-grade thorns that will puncture tires, tear through clothing, and cause serious injury to anyone stupid enough to try forcing their way through a mature stand. When you plant honey locusts close together and allow them to grow into a thicket, you create a barrier that is genuinely impassable without serious cutting equipment and a lot of time. No one is casually walking through a honey locust thicket. No one is hopping over it. No one is pushing through it in a panic. It is a wall of biological barbed wire that regenerates itself every year. But here is where honey locust goes from being just a defensive plant to being genuinely revolutionary. The pods are edible and incredibly high in calories. A mature honey locust can produce well over 100 pounds of pods every single year, and those pods contain a sweet, nutritious pulp that tastes something like a cross between carob and molasses. You can eat them raw, you can grind them into flour, you can ferment them into a beverage, or you can feed them to livestock. The seeds themselves are also edible once properly processed, giving you a protein-rich food source in addition to the carbohydrate-dense pulp. And all of this happens without you doing anything except harvesting what the tree naturally produces. You are not planting annual crops. You are not tilling soil. You are not dealing with irrigation or fertilization schedules. The tree simply grows, produces thorns, and drops hundreds of pounds of calories at your feet every autumn, while simultaneously making your property line completely impassable. Now let me talk about sea buckthorn, because this is the plant that everyone should be growing and almost nobody is. Sea buckthorn is a nitrogen-fixing shrub that produces some of the most nutrient-dense berries on the planet. These little orange fruits are absolutely loaded with vitamin C, omega fatty acids, and antioxidants. They have been used for thousands of years in Asia and Europe, both as food and medicine, and they grow in conditions that would kill most other fruiting plants. Sea buckthorn tolerates poor soil, drought, extreme cold, salt spray, and wind. It thrives in places where nothing else will grow. And, most importantly for our purposes, it produces these incredibly sharp thorns and grows in such dense, suckering thickets that it becomes completely impassable once established. When you plant sea buckthorn along a property line or around a vulnerable area, it spreads through underground runners and creates this interconnected mass of thorny stems that nothing can get through. Deer will not browse it because of the thorns. People will not push through it for the same reason. And every single year, that thicket produces pounds and pounds of berries that you can harvest for fresh eating, juice, oil extraction, or preservation. The oil from sea buckthorn berries is so valuable that it is sold in tiny bottles for ridiculous amounts of money in health food stores. But you can produce gallons of it in your own backyard simply by processing the berries from a mature thicket. You are creating a living fortress that pays you in one of the most nutrient-dense foods available while requiring almost no maintenance once it is established. Hawthorn is another absolute powerhouse for edible security barriers, and it has been used exactly this way for centuries in Europe. Traditional British hedgerows were often built around hawthorn specifically because it produces thorns that are long, sharp, and genuinely dangerous. A mature hawthorn hedge that has been properly maintained is called a dead hedge for a reason. It is so dense and so thoroughly armed with thorns that it functions like a living fence made of razor wire. Livestock cannot push through it. People cannot casually cross it. And historically, these hedges were used to mark property boundaries, contain animals, and create defensive perimeters around villages and farms. But hawthorn is not just a defensive plant. The berries, often called haws, are completely edible and have been used for food and medicine for thousands of years. They are high in pectin, which makes them excellent for jams and jellies. They can be dried and ground into flour. They can be fermented into wine or vinegar. And they have well-documented cardiovascular benefits, which is why hawthorn berry preparations are still sold as heart tonics in herbal medicine traditions around the world. The flowers are also edible and make a beautiful addition to salads or can be brewed into tea. So when you plant a hawthorn thicket along your property line, you are not just creating an impenetrable barrier. You are also establishing a perennial food and medicine source that will produce for decades with minimal input from you. Gumi is a plant that almost nobody has heard of, but it absolutely deserves a place in any edible security planting. Gumi is a relative of autumn olive and Russian olive, but unlike those two, it is not considered invasive in North America. It is a nitrogen-fixing shrub that grows quickly, tolerates poor soil, and produces tart, red berries that are rich in lycopene and other beneficial compounds. The berries are excellent fresh, cooked into sauces, or made into fruit leather. And while Gumi does not have the massive thorns of honey locust or hawthorn, it grows in such dense, twiggy thickets that it becomes very difficult to push through once established. When you combine Gumi with more heavily thorned species, you create a layered barrier that offers both food production and security. One of the great things about Gumi is how incredibly low maintenance it is. Because it fixes its own nitrogen, it actually improves the soil around it rather than depleting it. It requires no fertilization, no pesticides, and no irrigation once established. It tolerates heat, cold, drought, and poor drainage. And it produces berries prolifically, often yielding 15 to 20 pounds of fruit per mature plant. When you plant a hedgerow of Gumi mixed with hawthorn and sea buckthorn, you are creating a multi-layered food forest that also functions as a security barrier. You are stacking functions in a way that modern landscaping completely ignores, but that traditional agricultural societies understood instinctively. Now let me introduce you to a plant that is genuinely controversial but absolutely devastatingly effective as a security barrier. Hardy orange, also known as trifoliate orange or Poncirus trifoliata. Hardy orange is the only citrus that can survive hard freezes, and it grows successfully as far north as Zone 6. It produces these small, extremely sour oranges that are technically edible, but are usually too tart to eat fresh. However, they make excellent marmalade, they can be used as a souring agent in cooking, and the zest is highly aromatic and useful in flavoring. But the real value of hardy orange is not the fruit, it is the thorns. Hardy orange produces some of the most vicious thorns I have ever encountered on any plant. These are not little prickles. These are 2 to 3 inch long, rock-hard spikes that can easily puncture skin, clothing, and even leather. A mature, hardy orange hedge is genuinely terrifying to approach. It grows so densely and is so thoroughly armed that it creates a barrier that is every bit as effective as a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Except it is alive, it regenerates damage, and it produces food. Historically, hardy orange was planted along property lines in the American South specifically to keep people and animals out. It was used around prisons, around military installations, and around high-security areas because it is genuinely that effective. The only reason hardy orange is not more widely used today is because we have forgotten that plants can serve defensive functions. We have been convinced that security comes from technology, from cameras and alarms and fences, rather than from biology. But a hardy orange hedge does not require electricity. It does not have subscription fees. It does not fail when the power goes out. It just sits there, growing denser and more impassable every year, while also producing fruit that you can harvest and use. When you combine hardy orange with honey locust and hawthorn in a mixed planting, you create a defensive barrier that is genuinely formidable, and that would take hours of hard labor with heavy equipment to breach. Rugosa roses round out this list, and they are probably the most beautiful option for an edible security hedge. Rugosa roses are incredibly hardy, disease-resistant, and they produce massive rose hips that are among the best sources of vitamin C available from any plant. A single rose hip can contain more vitamin C than an orange. They are also delicious with a tart, fruity flavor that works beautifully in teas, jams, syrups, and baked goods. The petals are also edible and can be used fresh in salads, candied, or dried for tea. But rugosa roses are not just a food plant. They also produce serious thorns and grow in dense, suckering thickets that are difficult to penetrate. When you plant rugosa roses along a fence line or property boundary, they spread through underground runners and create this interconnected mass of thorny canes that blooms spectacularly in early summer and then produces huge crops of hips in the fall. You get beauty, food, and security all in one plant. And because rugosa roses are so tough and adaptable, they require almost no care once established. They tolerate salt, wind, poor soil, and neglect. They are one of those plants that you set and forget, and they just keep producing year after year. So stop clearing that brush. Stop seeing density and thorns as problems to be eliminated. Start seeing them as assets to be cultivated and enhanced. Replace the useless scrub with honey locust, sea buckthorn, hawthorn, gumi, hardy orange, and rugosa roses. Create living walls that feed your family and keep intruders out. Build biological fortresses that grow stronger and more valuable every single year. This is not landscaping. This is strategic land use. This is permaculture. This is how you turn your property into a genuinely secure and productive asset instead of just another sterile suburban lawn. And once you see what these plants can do, you will never look at a thicket the same way again.